Hello, friends. Uh, we are in the course called Nationalism and Constitutional Growth in India, 1858 to 1920. Um, for the last so many days, we are studying uh, about uh, constitutional growth in India, where how British colonialism expanded from the East India Company to becoming a giant British Raj by governing not only India but also the various surrounding areas. And in fact, the very famous phrase for British Empire, which did not, you know, where the sun did not, set. Which means that wherever British Empire was there was always sun rising. Let us now, because we have been talking about the ongoing, uh, you know, nationalism and certain, um, you know, generation of national consciousness among people, uh, from all across the society, from the elite class to the masses who were participating into freeing uh, their nation, the nation India. So, so let us talk about, because in the many of the lectures I deliberated upon the various acts introduced by the company, as well as of course the direct rule by the British Raj. From Government of India Act 1858 to 1861 to 1892, which we already dealt. In between, say prior to or before 1892, there was the foundation of one of the organization which will be now going to spearhead the Indian freedom struggle or Indian national movement. That is Indian National Congress. So, Indian National Congress, as it was established in 1885, uh, what was the organizational setup before the establishment of Indian National Congress, and how the understanding of freedom struggle started? We will be dealing with this in this lecture. Now, if you see that I have been saying that starting from Indian Renaissance, we relegate this terminology, especially beginning of the 19th century, where starting from Raja Ram Mohan Roy, we see that many of the social reformers reflecting on the social problems, the prejudices, um, all kind of caste hierarchy and inequality in the society, and also many of the Western ideas and values have encroached into our consciousness by reflecting on the ideas uh, propagated by Christian missionaries, as well as also by the East India Company, where East India Company abolishing some of the practices which is not uh, kind of which is not symbol of humanity, or which is against humanity, or a very overt kind of violation of rights of individuals. So so we see all over the world certain kind of upsurge of nationalism uh, is there on the landscape of 19th century, or end of 18th century. And the very idea of self-determination, freedom, independence, liberty, all these words are going to define the coming 2 centuries, 19th and 20th century. Uh, and people are now going to, uh, be very possessive about these ideas, well, freedom, liberty, or independence, which is in a way a very synonymous kind of words. So there was this worldwide upsurge of nationalism and self-determination, and especially the very slogan of French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which was a guiding force in many of the revolution which occurred parallel to French Revolution, and which occurred later, uh, had a kind of impact of French Revolution on those revolutions led by masses, or uh, the elite class or middle class intelligentsia, which ultimately spearheaded all those revolutions. So when we say beginning of the 19th century is the beginning of also Indian Renaissance, which in fact unified to some extent the Indian masses is a one entity, and also that also began uh, you know the very idea of nationalism. Now, when we say nationalism, or or modern nationalism, we have been already seeing prior to even 1857, many of the revolt, many of the wars which took place against British forces, or against French army, or Dutch army, or Portuguese army. What was that? Was that also nationalism? Or it was only the 1857 onwards, or prior to 1857, 2 3 decades prior to 1857, that was nationalism? So nationalism is a modern conception which has a root in the European uh, history, beginning of the 17th century, or mid of 17th century. That what we see, that there is certain kind of territorial uh, understanding of nation. Starting from Treaty of Westphalia, that what we see, that the very conception of nation is uh, a kind of parochial understanding, right? Now, whether the very import of European conception by understanding one language, one territory, or one language, one nation, that is a viable option for other society which has a diversity. Are we ready to accept that massive emotional force called nationalism in a diverse society? That need to be looked into, and by calling you know beginning of modern nationalism in India, because many of the scholars uh, from Bipan Chandra to Shekhar Bandyopadhyay to Sumit Sarkar to other scholars, they have been writing about by using this phraseology, and hence it's a kind of trap. So it's a very commonsensical to call it uh, modern nationalism or nationalism, because nationalism we are using here entire to British Raj, because nationalism calls for acknowledging, nationalism calls for recognizing, nationalism calls for looking out the enemy, and hence certain kind of inculcating national spirit or the feeling that that enemy need to be annihilated, or that enemy need to be marginalized, that enemy need to be kicked away, so that we own our nation, we become a custodian of our nation. So this has happened in Europe, and because we have imported this ideology, so at one point of time, uh, this understanding that why we want to remove British Raj is very understandable. I mean, we should, in fact, be ready to accept with certain qualification that yes, this massive emotional force called nationalism is working, it is uniting, and it is the indigenous population, the people of India by and large, who do not want any kind of alien rule or foreign rule which subjugates our population, and our population do not have any kind of agency. It is very understandable. And because nationalism is a byproduct of modernity, even if we do not accept it, it was bound to encroach into general consciousness. Because the colonial modernity wanted these ideologies to spread. The corollary would be secularism, liberalism, democracy, idealism. All these ideologies, in a way, were cooking up during the Enlightenment and Renaissance, European Enlightenment and Renaissance. So, quite naturally, the Indian brand of nationalism in any way is not going to deflect from the very general definition or general understanding of nationalism. Now we may put it, prefix or suffix to nationalism, but the very root, the very genealogy is very exclusive. to find that alien. So when we are talking about beginning of modern nationalism in India, we must keep it in mind these points. So we should be clear about, by not eulogizing about any kind of national fervor to create certain kind of homogeneity, that is unwarranted, that is not required. No. By cherishing diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of um, you know cultures, diversity of language, that's the beauty of India, and that need to be cherished. So um, let us now move ahead with these notions with certain kind of critical input. For the many of the classes, I have been not dealing with these questions very critically, but I thought that this is very opportune time, that when we are talking about nationalism and constitutional growth, and particularly now onwards when we are going to talk more about nationalism for coming at least say um, 10 15 lectures onwards, we should keep it in mind that how this nationalism unfolded on Indian landscape, so that we have more clarity of the current politics or contemporary politics. So it's offshoot of modernization, uh, initiated by the British in India, and then this modern nationalism was in fact the offshoot uh, of modernization. The reason being that people who were not connected. I mean, go back to Benedict Anderson. Benedict Anderson writes about imagined communities, right? Those communities which were not even connected, right? They were not having any kind of understanding about the differences of the other people living within the same territorial setup, right? Or how they are going to, in any way, to be called as part of the nation, right? So one can agree to the fact that yes, it is important to have a very shared culture, shared history, so on and so forth. But one cannot, forcefully incorporate into its fold by saying that no, it's part of a shared culture and shared history, uh, and hence one need to acknowledge that you are part of the nation, so on and so forth. So it was created through transportation, through communication. People got to know about their issues. People had a kind of common issues. People had a kind of same problem, right? So the very idea of collaboration, alliance among communities and people, that created kind of one entity, because there was a common enemy, and that common enemy uh, need to be removed, so that people by and large will have air of freedom. So modern nationalism was Modern nationalism in India, particularly, was a reaction to British imperialist policies. So, with these opening remarks, let us now move ahead. That what were the factors in the growth of modern nationalism? If we see, the very understanding of contradictions, uh, which was there between Indian and colonial interests. You know, the interests of Indian people were very different from the colonial interests, and hence there's very contradiction. There's no commonality. There's very contradiction. In fact, uh, divided people uh, from the colonial masters, and kind of Indian people distanced from them. And also people realize that colonial rule is the major cause of economic backwardness. The very rapacious, the very extractive colonialism, which was against the interest of the Indian people, led to the economic backwardness of India. And also the nationalist movement, started addressing those contradictions. The peasants, artisans, intellectuals, etc., they came to realize that colonial rule was the major cause of India's economic backwardness, and that the backwardness and that the interest of the Indians involved the interest of all sections and classes, like peasants, artisans, handicraftsmen, workers, intellectuals, the educated, and the capitalists. So the nationalist movement arose to take up the challenge of these contradictions inherent in the character and policies of colonial rule. Now, moving ahead to see the very political, administrative, and economic unification of the country. The very British rule has now been expanded from Himalayas to Cape Comorin, north to south, and east to west from Assam to Khyber Pass. There is unification through a professional civil service, unified judiciary, and codified laws. The economic fate linked due to unified governance. And ultimately, as I was saying, that, because of the modern means of transport and communication, that fostered exchange of ideas, that fostered exchange of uh, all sort of ideas, including political ideas. So, from the nationalist point of view, this process of unification had a twofold effect. As the economic fate of the people of different regions got linked together. For instance, failure of crops in one region affected the prices and supply in another region. And also, the modern means of transport and communication brought people especially the leaders from different regions together. And this was important for the exchange of political ideas and for mobilization, which is important. To mobilize people. Why revolt of 1857 failed? Because people were unable to mobilize. Remember that what in the causes of the revolt Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wrote, that the revolt started sometimes at one place, the other time at the other place, and there was no coordination because there was no mobilization. And the means of communication provides that how public opinion and the political ideas are going to be propagated, which going to ultimately uh, create organizational base, which in a way also generated the modern um, understanding of unification. Now, ultimately, with political, administrative, economic unification of the country, what were the other force, the other ideas which ultimately helped in generating that consciousness? If we see the Western ideas were propagated in modern education system, the various sort of thinkers were introduced who were indeed talking about great ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And the English language, especially, helped nationalist leaders from different linguistic regions to communicate with each other. Those among the educated who took up liberal professions, like lawyers, doctors, etc., they often visited England for higher education. There they saw the working of modern political institutions in a free country and compared that system with the Indian situation where even basic rights were denied to the citizens. This ever expanding English educated class formed the middle class. And this middle class intelligentsia, who constituted the nucleus for the newly arising political unrest, it was this section which provided leadership to the Indian Political Association. So, if we move ahead and see that how press, literature, the very understanding of uniqueness of India by going back to the history inculcated confidence and also gave certain kind of progressive character of socio-religious reform movements. this unprecedented growth of Indian owned newspapers spreading modern ideas, starting from Rajaram Mohan Roy, we have already seen that the vernacular newspapers coming on the national scene, from the Hindu, for an example, or Times of India, for an example, to many newspapers which started way back in the 19th century, late 19th century, that in a way incorporated into its writing all sort of radical ideas to inculcate and pump energy into the movement. And this second half of the 19th century, we saw an unprecedented growth of Indian owned English and vernacular newspapers. Despite numerous restrictions imposed on the press by the colonial rulers from time to time. Now, in 1877, there were about 169 newspapers published in vernacular language, and their circulation reached the neighborhood of more than 1 lakh people. The press, while criticizing official policies on the one hand, urged the people to unite on the other. It also helped spread modern ideas of self governance, democracy, civil rights, and industrialization. The newspapers, journals, pamphlets, and nationalist literature helped in the exchange of political ideas among nationalist leaders from different regions. And thanks to, of course, the railways, which connected people more physically to meet, to organize events, to give speeches, and many more activities. Now, the historical researches by European scholars such as Max Muller, Monia Williams, Roth and Sassoon, and by Indian scholars such as R.G. Bhandarkar, Alan Mitra, and Swami Vivekananda, created an entirely new picture of India's past. And of course, that need to be again qualified as a too much of glorification is of course going to fabricate the very idea of history. But nevertheless, the very strategic interpretation of history and also documentation of certain historical events that created a narrative that what British Raj had created about that the India or the people of India do not have a history. It's a very poor history. So this picture was characterized by well-developed political, economic, and social institutions, a flourishing trade with the outside world, a rich heritage in arts and culture, and numerous cities. Now, many of the European scholars they started putting up, theory that the Indo-Aryans belong to the same ethnic group from which other nations of Europe had evolved. And that gave a psychological boost to the educated Indians. Now, I mean, this whether that need to be cherished or not, but that in a way gave certain kind of boost that ultimately the very idea that the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the one world, one family, right? If Indo-Aryans belong to the same ethnic group of that what European nations are, then we Indians too are like Europeans. So then why subjugation, why slavery, why all sort of colonial exploitation? But this in a way generated self-respect and confidence, which helped the nationalists to demolish colonial myth that India had a long history of servility to foreign rulers. Now, according to Percival Spear, the historian, that the new middle class was a well integrated all India class with varied background, but a common foreground of knowledge, ideas, and values. It was a minority of Indian society, but a dynamic minority. It had a sense of unity, of purpose, and of hope. So, the very emergence of the new middle class, which was well integrated, and they came from various kinds of background, they got inspired by those knowledge, ideas, and values, but they were so powerful in their expositions that they in fact informed the masses about the purpose and created and generated hope. There were several reactionary policies and racial arrogance of rulers. The idea of racial myths of white superiority, the white man's burden, you know, the civilizational mission, so on and so forth, which I have actually dealt in many of the previous lecture. This white superiority was sought to be perpetuated by the British through a deliberate policy of discrimination and segregation. And Indians particularly left, with the scar of this discriminatory practices, unheard of, the idea of segregation, and they were deeply hurt by this. Now, Lytton's reactionary policies, such as reduction of maximum age limit for the ICS examination from 21 years to 19 years in 1876, the Grand Delhi Darbar of 1877, when the country was in the severe grip of famine, and also the Vernacular Press Act 1878 and the Arms Act 1878. These were the very draconian laws and the act like Delhi Darbar event, and this provoked a storm of opposition in the country. And then came the Ilbert Bill controversy, where Indians got to know that how the workers in United Kingdom have protested, and the Ripon's government had sought to abolish judicial disqualification based on race distinction and to give the Indian members of the covenanted civil service the same powers and rights as those enjoyed by the European colleagues. Now, Ripon had to modify the bill, thus almost defeating the original purpose because of the stiff opposition from the European community. So it became clear to the nationalists that justice and fair play could not be expected where interests of the European community were involved. However, the organized agitation by the Europeans to revoke the Ilbert Bill also taught the nationalists how to agitate for certain rights and demands. So, the same community, the same group of people, on one hand, opposing the cause, and on the other hand, supporting the cause. Now, let us also deal briefly, because we are going to now switching over to Indian National Congress in the next lecture. Let us try to also understand that what were the political associations before the establishment of the Indian National Congress. As we all know that Indian National Congress was not the first political organization in India. However, most of the political associations in the early half of the 19th century were dominated by wealthy and aristocratic elements. They were local or regional in character. Through long petitions to the British Parliament, most of them demanded administrative reforms, association of Indians with the administration, and spread of education. The political association of the second half of the 19th century came to be increasingly dominated by the educated middle class, the lawyers, journalists, doctors, teachers, etc. And they had a wider perspective and a larger agenda. Now, if you see the political associations in Bengal, what we see is that there is Bang Bhasha Prakashika Sabha, which was formed in 1836 by associates of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. And later on in Zamindari Association, more popularly known as Landholders Society, was founded to safeguard the interest of the landlords. Then Bengal British India Society was founded in 1843. And this particularly Bengal British India Society was founded with the object of the collection and dissemination of information relating to the actual condition of the people of British India, and to employ such other means of peaceful and lawful character. And lawful character as may appear calculated to secure the welfare, extend the just rights, and advance the interests of all classes of our fellow subjects. Now, 1851, both Landholders Society and the Bengal British India Society that merged into the British Indian Association. Later on, what we also see, the East India Association was organized by Dadabhai Nauroji in 1866 in London to discuss the Indian question and influence public men in England to promote Indian welfare. Later, branches of the association were started in prominent Indian cities. Now, again, if you see the Indian League, which was started in 1875 by Sisir Kumar Ghosh, with the object of stimulating the sense of nationalism among the people and of encouraging political education. The Indian Association of Calcutta, which was also known as the Indian National Association, that superseded the Indian League and was founded in 1876 by younger nationalists of Bengal, led by Surendranath Banerjee and Anand Mohan Bose, who were getting discontented with the conservative and pro-landlord policies of the British Indian Association. Now, this particular organization protested against the reduction of the age limit in 1877 for candidates of the Indian Civil Services examination. Now, the association demanded simultaneous holding of civil service examination in England and India and Indianization of higher administrative posts. It led a campaign against the Repressive Arms Act and the Vernacular Press Act. And similarly, this association is sponsored an All India conference which first took place in Calcutta from December 28 to 30, 1883. Now, if we see the political associations in Bombay and Madras, what we see that, in Bombay, especially the Pune Sarvajnik Sabha, which was founded by M.G. Ranade, was in fact the organization which wanted to bridge, the gap or service between the government and the people. The Bombay Presidency Association, which was started by Badruddin Tayyibji, Firoz Shah Mehta, and K.T. Telang in 1885. In Madras, there was Madras Mahajan Sabha in 1884 by M. Virarag Vachari and B. Subramanya Iyer and P. Ananda Charlu. So these were the organization in Madras and Bombay. Now, what were the pre-Congress campaigns? If we see the pre-Congress campaigns, these associations organized various campaigns before the Indian National Congress, which appeared on the national scene. For an example, for imposition of import duty on cotton in 1875, Indianization of government services ICS examination 1878-79, against Lytton's Afghan adventure, against Arms Act, against Vernacular Press Act. Now, regarding the Vernacular Press Act 1878, which was indeed a draconian act to some extent, because that wanted to cripple the very idea of national movement, because Indians were in a way able to voice their opinion in more radical fashion in the vernacular language. So in 1878, this act was established by Lord Lytton, and the act was designed to control the vernacular press better and to repress and punish the seditious reports. So the sedition charges, for an example. The Vernacular Press Act also allowed the British government to confiscate newspapers, assets, which include the printing press and other media. If anything against the policies of the British government was found in the printing press, it was objected to and repressed with the help of the Vernacular Press Act. Now, the key provisions that were included in this act were that the district magistrate was empowered to check after the printing and publishing of newspapers before they enter into government undertaking sectors, so that the reports do not dissatisfy any individual. This was the Vernacular Press Act. Now, moving ahead with some of the other campaigns were like for right to join volunteer corps, against plantation labor, and against Inland Immigration Act, in support of Ilbert Bill, for an All India Fund for Political Agitation, campaign in Britain to vote for Pro-India Party, and against reduction in maximum age for appearing in ICS examination. The Indian Association took up this question and organized an All India agitation against it, popularly known as ICS agitation. So, I have spoken at length on these issues prior to the establishment of Indian National Congress. I stop here, and we will see the foundation of Indian National Congress, the very causes and the factors behind it. Thank you.